Iris and Fred. Do I have to start over? No. This is Louis Frumkes, and I think you heard my introduction. I could do it again, but our speaker tonight is Iris Smyles, and she's being interviewed by next month's distinguished speaker, Frederick Tudden. Iris and Frederick, over to you.
That's my summons. That's my summons to start talking to Iris. And actually, I wouldn't use the word interview, but I say have a conversation with her. I think it'd be more fun. But two things. First of all, to compliment you on all your work, including two books that haven't been mentioned: Dating Tips for the Unemployed, which is just marvelous, marvelous, marvelous pieces. And the last and most recent book came out this summer, I think, called Droll Tales, which I find absolutely astonishingly original and daring and enviable. As another writer, I envy you at the book. Yet, Droll Tales, it's just an achievement. Anyway, we go on now. Let's talk about you and your life as a person, as a writer. You are a person, I assume.
So far.
And I know that you're a writer. There's evidence of it in book form. So here's my question, my first question. What started you off as a writer? What made you want to be a writer, and when did you start?
Let's see. I started, the first book that I really loved was The Hobbit. Like a lot of people, I wasn't a big reader when I was a child of children's literature because I wanted to be out playing and using my muscles and overpowering the boys with my strength and speed. But I read that, and I read that because I'd heard my brother talking with my father about the book, and they were having such an interesting conversation, and I wanted to be able to participate. So I read that, I loved it, and that was the beginning. But before that, I'd been keeping a journal just for posterity, for after I died, which is a normal thing to think about when you're...
How old were you, about 5?
Yeah, I started the journal when I was, 6 or 7. I was a late starter, but it never really took off because I kept using all of these cute little heart-shaped journals that you get at novelty shops because it was from my parents' store, so they looked really good, but they didn't have much room for real prose. So when I started to get into actual writing, though, it was, I remember I'd seen the movie, based on the Neil Simon play Brighton Beach Memoirs, about Neil Simon when he's a young man, and he is kind of writing all about his family and his friends in the garage, and he's writing in a marble notebook. And I was so enchanted with the movie and the fact that he could sort of turn his sometimes ridiculous life into something fun. And so after that, I threw out the cute diaries, and I got a marble notebook, and then I started documenting the very important crushes that I had in the 5th grade, and it continued from there.
How old were you? What's 5th grade? How old were you?
10.
10, okay.
Yeah. And which I hope will be published posthumously. Of course. That was the plan when I was writing those detailed chronicles.
Well, the world is longing to see that.
Yeah.
But you'll have to wait until you're not here.
And everyone in it is dead.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah. Maybe
whoever goes first.
Maybe 100 years after my death, like Mark Twain.
Okay.
We can finally read about what happened at the swim meet in 1988.
Yeah. Perfect. So now, let's say we jump ahead to the time when you actually started writing, I guess, fiction. I don't know if you started writing fiction right away, or essays. But when was the time you said, I really want to write? I want to write as a professional writer. Not just as a hobby, but someone who wants to be engaged with the world and have the world read her books.
Well, that came a little later because though I wanted to be a writer, all of the writers that I had been reading were dead. So for a long time, I thought in order to be an author, you had to be dead. So I thought, okay, once I'm dead, I can be a writer, but in the meantime, I'll need a job. So I thought I would be a movie star. Just to pay the bills while I waited for my legacy to kick in. But then later on with more reading, I discovered that some writers were actually living. And so I thought I would, start a little early.
I see. Well, it's very, yeah, the dead seem to have written a lot of books when they're dead. So,
All my favorite
yeah,
ones.
that's it. They
Yeah,
seem,
all the best writers are dead, except for you and I.
but now, please, let's go ahead to, I mean, I don't say go ahead, I just want to know, okay, that's all well and good, but when did you decide, for example, to go to study writing? You went to City College of New York in the graduate program. What made you say, now I need some help, or I want to see more what I can do, or how better myself? What made you decide on that?
Well, I generally like to keep it under wraps about my advanced degrees.
Oh, I saw.
But the reason why it wasn't, the reason I went to graduate school really was that I was teaching middle school, and I just wanted out of the real world. I'd spent a couple years, if you can call that the real world, but I'd spent a couple years after college out in the real world, and it was harsh, cold, unwelcoming. And so I thought, oh, graduate school, I can keep going, and then that'll give me some legitimacy and some time while I'm hanging around there. I can write a novel and then hopefully emerge in some way, which I'm still emerging.
Had you started writing already? Had you started writing a novel or a book of stories when you went to graduate school?
Yes, before that. When I finished college, I spent a summer writing a novel called Nowhere is a Place. And I wrote the whole thing and showed a few lines. It's about these sort of barflies at this bar near my apartment in Hell's Kitchen. I showed a little bit of it to my father, and he told me, write what you know, because he didn't want to believe that that's what I knew, but that is what I knew. That's what I was doing. I was hanging out and drinking a lot, because also I thought the path to writing is becoming an alcoholic, because there are so many alcoholics. And the writing is a little difficult, but the drinking is easy. And so I swiftly committed myself to that end and mastered it. But anyway, so I still have that book, that novel in a drawer. And before that, I've been writing a lot of poetry, actually, and the occasional story. But that's kind of when really fiction started.
Let me ask you this. A lot of people go to graduate programs and take writing classes, whatever their motive. Some want to escape their jobs, whatever, some time free just to play and become writers, to play that they're writers. I don't know what the consequences of that. But in your case, did taking those classes help you as a writer at all? And would you recommend to any other writers, or would-be writers, or want to be writers, or writers who want some other place to write, that they go to graduate school or get their MFA?
Well, I see what you're getting at, because I took a class with you.
No, I wasn't getting it. No, I really wasn't.
Everything I learned was from you. Well, yes and no. I know, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I don't think you have to go to you certainly don't have to go to school, and sometimes it can be very destructive. I found the workshops frequently destructive, because you've got 12 people who also don't know what they're doing, each telling you their opinion of what you think you should do, often in completely different directions, and it confused me more than helped me. Your advice helped me the most, which was simply keep going. So in that way, I do think it can be very useful, because if it just gives you the feeling of making your writing a priority and taking yourself seriously, then that can help a lot. But really, I mean, I feel like I really learned to write primarily just by trial and error, just by writing, by reading, and sharing my work with a trusted friend who is you, and sometimes taking your advice, and sometimes saying you don't know what you're talking about, and going ahead anyway, and trusting myself. But I credit you with, I feel like you really helped me to trust myself and to not quit and not get overwhelmed with self-doubt, because I think that it's very easy to try and become discouraged because you're not immediately writing like Herman Melville. which is probably for the best because Moby Dick had a real hard time of it before it came into the canon. It's considered his failure book, as you know. But yeah, so.
Well, in my experience, it's a haven for a while, young people especially. They just want to feel as a community. Because there is no community, I'm sure you know that. You were outside of classes, you were alone. And that's it. It's a very lonely place to be. As a writer, they're lonely anyway. But you were alone with anyone looking at the work, cheering you on or anything. So I'm very happy to hear this. It's yeah.
Especially because I didn't know, my friends were not literary people. They weren't particularly big readers or anything. I mean, they were sort of really party people, DJs and carousers and other things. So just to be able to be with other people and talk about books was very exciting.
While you mentioned books, I had this in my mind to ask you anyway. Two questions, the two-part question. What do you think the importance of books are to a writer? And part two, what books have you found especially valuable in your work, in the course of your work, and the influence on your work, on the ambition to write as well as that book or that writer? What were you say to any of those questions? First of all, what's the importance of reading or writing?
Well, first of all, I think, this reminds me, one time I was on one of these dating apps and this man wrote to me and he said, "Oh, I'm a writer too." And so I said, so I started asking him, "Well, what do you like to read?" And he said, "Oh, I don't read books, I write them." Which is strange because imagine a musician saying, "I don't listen to music, I compose it." So I think it's natural if you're interested, it first begins with reading. And for me, there were certain books that just, I've always felt and still feel very lost in the world. There's the way that people communicate in polite conversation or even in intimate conversation, but then there's what's really going on. And there were certain books where I just felt that just kind of broke the world open. And this author was speaking directly to me in our shared language. And it was kind of the most intimate experience I've ever had, which is not to say that I'm bad in bed up until then. But it's very, there's things, something is said in literature, I mean, when it's beautiful, in the same way with music, there's that or an art that is just doesn't come through everyday experience. And so I felt like I was getting this message in a bottle from certain writers, and like it was a letter to me. And I wanted to write because I wanted to participate in the conversation and write back to that or to another reader who might find my book and really get what I was trying to say and feel connected and touched by it. Which not everyone, I mean, not every book is for every person, but sometimes you have those ideal reading experiences and it's magical.
Well, can you remember the books that you felt that way about?
Yeah, I suppose the first book was perhaps Catch-22 that really touched me and affected me and also made me laugh like crazy. And it was so wise. And then also Henry Miller, sorry, Tropic of Cancer. I read at 17, which I know he's very unfashionable.
You read it when you were 17?
Yeah. He's very unfashionable now, and I haven't gone back and read Tropic of Cancer again, so I don't know really what's in there. I just remember I was struck by the music of it and the thinking on the page, and also the thing of this isn't just a plot. There's no plot. It's just, and that, a book can be, it just broke open the whole idea of literature too. So I was never interested in the sort of plot-driven Agatha Christie stuff of, where something happens and then there's a mystery. Who did it? I don't care who did it. I'm more interested in the adventure and confusion of real life, which is not to say books that are, domestic. They could be fanciful books like Flann O'Brien's The Third Policeman is extremely surreal, or I don't know if surreal is the right word, but magical, or Calvino's The Baron in the Trees. While they're far out, the stories are not realistic, but it's true, and it tells you about life, and it's beautiful, and it feel a little less alone when I read those books, which is everything.
They tell you a lot about life without telling you. That's what's so wonderful. There's just a resonance in the book. They resonate. And you don't know what it is exactly, but you come to something very deep. Any book specifically put you in the direction of the kind of book like the most recent one, Droll Tales, so fanciful. I don't use the word surrealistic, but not naturalistic. Filled with poetry that's written in prose. I go on about that book because I'm enchanted by it. Droll Tales. Is anyone specific that you might say put you in that direction? Any writers? Or maybe movies, or maybe a work of art?
Well, I was sort of, I guess, some of the stories in that book actually are, I began writing 20 or 25 years ago. Shelves, for example, was one of the first stories I ever wrote. It's undergone many revisions, but I wrote that, and immediately after I finished it, I became very depressed, put it away, and had to take a nap because I looked at it and I was like, this isn't anything like the books I'm reading. So it's not, if this isn't how a story is supposed to be, and I was very discouraged. And then later on, I took it out again and sort of interested in it a little bit with some distance and less self-criticism, and then showed it to a few people who really loved it, and it turns out, I guess I discovered that the fact that it was unusual wasn't a problem, but it was something that was nice about it. So I started writing more in that direction, or just letting myself actually be, letting those weird voices come through and doing whatever I want and being as free as I want. There are some writers, I guess, it took a little encouragement in finishing the book because a big concern also is publishing. It's one thing to write this stuff, but then when you don't see it out in the world, you wonder, well, how am I ever going to get this published? And so I started, I stumbled onto Villiers de l'Isle Adam, which I guess nobody's heard of him, so maybe you don't know that I'm mispronouncing his name because I don't speak French. Anyway, he wrote Axel, Cruel Tales, and just these crazy.
He's a French later
symbolist.
Sorry?
A French symbolist.
Yeah, but at the end of the 19th century.
Yes.
About 1880, 1990.
And also, who was the founder of pataphysics?
Alfred Jarry.
Jarry.
J-A-R.
Yes, who founded the imaginary science of pataphysics, which has since influenced so many different people, including the Beatles, apparently, Ubu Ra, and he's just, and I'll just to say, I think I have it somewhere here, but his book specifically, the opinions of Dr. Faustroll.
Yes, Faustroll.
I'm missing the title a little bit, but is so bizarre. And so as I was finishing the book, I was reading that and I thought, don't worry about the marketplace. Look at all these, there's weird books that exist. Just go for it and do exactly what you want. He does exactly what he wants. So it didn't influence me directly. It just sort of helped give myself permission. But the interesting thing I discovered after is that that book was so weird that it was only published posthumously, because even his editor, who was publishing his work, who he was already known for being totally weird, couldn't make sense of it. And he's like, I can't with this. This is ridiculous. So it had to be published posthumously. So I guess, yeah, it turns out a lot of my models of success that were all failures in their life, and the books were published posthumously. I think even The Third Policeman also had trouble getting through and was maybe published posthumously because it wasn't as conventional as his earlier books, Flann O'Brien's, which is interesting because now that's the book he's most known for. So I guess there's a bit of a conflict there.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking that The Leopard, Gaffer Parde, that was published possibly. Intelligent editors just couldn't make since that they could publish it. So a lot of work has come up later when other people understand it better. Maybe it's time.
Well, that's why I think also when my 5th grade journal, that's why I think I was on the right track.
Right.
That you know, the critics will not be able to make sense of it until after I'm dead.
I agree with you.
It's too complicated.
You know, but there are two things. You spoke about being bad in bed before. You said something about being bad in bed.
Oh, well, because I had said that the most intimate experience I had ever had was through reading. And then I worried that that could be interpreted as that I haven't had intimate sexual experiences. So I just want to put it out there that, you know, sex is transcendent and everything, and this should no way reflect on my ability as a human being.
Well, I guess we should say that maybe Mr. Funkus will invite us another time, and you can tell the world about what your ideas of what is good in bed and what is not. People will be fascinated to know that.
Well, I think in bed, as in books, transcendence is everything.
Yeah, okay, and uniqueness, originality, right? Freshness,
Sincerity, and music.
Music and conviction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, not that you have to be listening to music while you're doing it, but you should. There's a music.
Right. Well, I would
couples
say
make
as
together.
in a work of art, you have to sustain the effort to complete it. So that would be, so I would say stamina would be part of the parallel structures of bed and books, the two Bs.
Right, and you don't want to be crippled by self-doubt.
No, okay, that's very bad. Without having confidence in both issues, as a writer and as a bedmate.
We should do another talk just
we'll do that.
about sex.
So let me go back to something else, okay?
Yeah.
In that book, which I keep promoting to my last breath, Droll Tales, there's a story I'm so in love with. I'm just in love with it. And I rank that story with among the great short stories I've read in my life. They're really great. And people, Tolstoy's great short story, and the Ilyich, Melville's short story, Bartleby. This is for me a masterpiece. And the question then is this: it's about, by the way, it's about a woman who has many other reasons for her adventures, but she becomes a living statue. I mean, we've all probably seen it somewhere where you just go and you become a Statue of Liberty. Anyway,
You're speaking of Medusa's Garden.
Medusa's Garden.
Yeah.
Did I not say that? I thought I did. Medusa's Garden. My Bronx accent makes it blurry. It's an incredible story, and part of it has to do with the character, the protagonist, going from place to place. One of the places is in Nice, in France.
Yeah.
So that makes the question, or where makes the question? Did I come from Russia? That asks the question. You've traveled a lot, and you've lived in Greece a lot. Does travel affect you or other writers in writing? Let me put it this way. I remember when I was a young man, they'd say to you, if you want to be a writer, you should know different languages, and you should also travel a lot. And if you can see my generation and younger, and older rather, they traveled a lot. Henry Miller, for example, he lived in France, in Greece. Do you find, do you recommend to writers that they have an experience of travel, that they broaden their life that way, and has it affected you as a writer?
Good question, but that reminds me, speaking of France, we've lost Claudia here. She's my friend.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Oh, she likes
You're
her.
an annoyance.
That's
I'm
not
so sorry. I didn't mean that.
fresh.
Yeah.
Well, I have traveled a lot. And actually, I mean, that particular story, Medusa's Garden, was inspired by seeing, you see many living statues, especially in Barcelona, and other places where people, I remember the first time I saw where people just, they'll paint themselves silver and then stand still for the whole day. And I mean, for years I would, if I were abroad and I would see one of them, and I just thought, who are these people? How do you end up at this, or not end up, because who's to say it's the end of your life, but who are the people? What leads you to this moment where suddenly you're standing still under a tree in a square, covered in, gold paint? So it began with a sort of curiosity. I was actually in Nice when I started writing that story, because I thought, instead of just wondering, why don't I find out? I did do a little bit of research to find out about the living statues and the history of it, but the story isn't really about the history of it. That was just sort of fed into the background. So it's just kind of, I guess it's a way of exploring some questions and feelings that I had through this character, who I guess you could say, well, she comes to be with many living statues, whom I think of as, trying to stop time by standing still. And why would you want to stop time? I guess sometimes I feel this panic about when you're really aware of it, of every second passing, like right now and now and now, and it can never be gotten back, and then it races along. And I feel almost like it's like life is this train that I'm chasing after, and is the feeling of, well, what if I could just keep it for a moment, or however long, so I could just catch up? And it's not the kind of the implicit, mourning of the death of each moment, because you don't want, it's horrible that just 5 minutes ago will never be again. Or maybe it's not horrible if it was boring for everyone, but sometimes it's sad moving through life. It's wonderful because you're moving on to the next thing and the next thing, but there's just this constant, with every second and moment in life you gain, there's what you lose. And I guess I was a little preoccupied with that, that kind of melancholy, and when I wrote that, and it sort of just, it wasn't planned exactly. I was sort of exploring. And so it began with the thing of, who is this person? And then I thought, well, what if I was that? What if I was that? I just sort of tried to, not me exactly, but tried to imagine a life that would have led me there.
I can't speak of it too highly. Wonderful. So I just want to, before we finish, we have some time, a little bit of time. Let me ask you a few things. You mentioned before writing in the way that writers who weren't published in their lifetime, or they were, these particular works were not published. I remember talking always to my students about doing what it is they in their heart want to do, what it is they really want to write, and not be concerned with the conventions and the formulas that you hear in MFA program, arc of the novel, plot, characters round and flat, all that stuff. No. Now, what you brought up was, well, if you do that, how do you get it into the world? If you write something so original, so fresh, and so authentically art, how do you find that in the marketplace if people are not ready for such a work, or if you're not ready to read such a work? What's your address on that issue to people who are also longing to be fresh and original writers?
Well, I would say if you see yourself as an artist, go for it. Otherwise, if you're just writing just to get published, well, you're going to compromise on what you really want to say, or then it doesn't make sense, because there's not that much money in it. You're better off going into, get a job in finance, and make your art really art, or become a plumber, which sometimes I fantasize about doing when I become discouraged with the professional aspects, because it can be hard. And I have thought sometimes maybe I should write a book that's more like this. It's a more sure way in, because it's pretty clear if you when you look at the trends of what's popular, it's pretty clear what books are going to have an easy path. And certainly, I mean, publishers, especially these days, are timid. So they're reluctant to take a risk on a book. I mean, that's why even I take heart. Now, I haven't read the Harry Potter series, but from what I read, she was rejected. Harry Potter was rejected by every agent until one agent took her on, and then every publisher until they found a publisher. And the reason they told her is, the reason they gave her is, kids today, the current trend is they want realist fiction, YA books. They don't want this fantasy stuff. And then meanwhile, she ushered in the whole age of all of this fantasy stuff. So it's very hard to be the first person doing something. But then, if you're either, I think if you're an artist, it doesn't really make any sense to do anything other than what you really believe in. And so be as wild and crazy as you want. And finally, someone will find it. If it's some, there will be some reader out there who it will be really important to, because like I've found with books, because it's not like everything else. People don't necessarily want all of that. There's so much dross. There's so much, I think a lot of times we talk these days about the readership declining and people don't read as much. And I think that the publishing world, writers and editors and publishers should take some responsibility for that. Maybe we're just not putting out really interesting books. And so when people decide to read a book and they look at whatever is popular and they say, well, this isn't that interesting, I'd rather watch that show on Netflix. I can understand that. So I think be more interesting so that, and as crazy as possible, and write something that can only be a book, because otherwise, why shouldn't it be a movie or anything else? And there is a place for literature. It's special. It speaks to you in a different way than these other forms. Versus some books, I guess, are, as they call it in Hollywood, source material, readily adaptable, but not particularly, they would be better probably as a movie than they are as a book.
Well, you use the word artist. You said if you want to be an artist. But when most young writers, especially who are going into the writing world, aren't thinking about artistry. They're thinking about being professional writers who can sell their books. And I think that that's already the start of the problem, that there's no ambition to do something, even if you think it's ridiculous and egomaniacal, an ambition to reach beyond the ordinary and to do something really beautiful and noble and satisfying to yourself. If you feel you've done something true, if you've done something honest for yourself, and you hope for the reader.
Well, to say with that, I actually think, to repeat again, if you're doing it just as a profession, solely as an idea to make money, get another profession because it's an easier road and there's more money in it. Number one. So the only reason to do it is if you to really be honest. And also another thing is that I think it's somewhat immoral to put out bad books. There are so many amazing books already written that we don't know about. And then there's so many books coming out every year. And so if there's a glut of bad books, it makes it harder to find the good ones. So it's actually a crime against literature and a crime against other people, because you're demanding of their attention something that may not, and of their time, something that may not be worth it. So you're taking a little bit of their time, which, since time is all we have, it's a little murder. So you have to believe in what you're doing. If you don't do it, because it's wrong.
Well, many people go into writing without the idea they want to be bad writers. They just think they want to satisfy an audience. They want to get an agent, they want to get a publisher, and they want to be successful.
But if they want to satisfy an audience, that's a good thing. If it's a circular thing, because then you're actually, then you're trying to entertain people and you're offering something. But if it's simply I want to be a writer versus I have something to say, or I can entertain people. That's the difference.
That's a good distinction. That's good distinguishment. What did you say the other day about Graham Greene? He said there are two kinds of Graham Greene. There are
Yeah.
two kinds of books. What did he say?
Well, he divided his own books into the serious novels, and he called them entertainments. Although many of his entertainments are pretty serious novels, but let's say they were more tend to be more humorous, like The Orient Express or Our Man in Havana, or what was it, My Aunt?
Travels
with My Aunt.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
It's a really.
But I love that. I mean, writers don't talk enough about, I think one of the problems in the writing programs is people don't talk or place a premium on entertaining. Often I'll open a book and the first lines will be so boring, and you understand in this kind of pose of seriousness that you're supposed to read on, but why should I? If the first line doesn't grab you, I think it's a responsibility of the author to first and foremost entertain, and then you can people have to be interested in your ideas first, not assault them with it. You don't want to be like at a party, you don't immediately go up to someone and start spouting your philosophy. You gotta work that in with a little charm.
No, it's immensely important. We talk about classes and teaching writing also. I mean, it's immensely important, especially now when we have so many diversions, television and all kinds of movies. It's absolutely imperative that as a writer, you capture your reader quickly. I mean, mid-19th century novel didn't have to worry about that when a book is 500, 600 pages. You had a lot of time to develop.
Because what were they going to do? Go to church instead? Which, by the way, that what did used to be a big form of entertainment. Yeah. I mean, that's why all of the subject. I mean, in the Middle Ages, that was like basically the movie house.
Yeah. But I'm just saying that it's not as if we're trying to, I'm not speaking about dismantling craft. In order to be wise, you have to be crafty. And I think that craft is immensely important. I didn't want to just suggest or have you suggest, I think that just go crazy on the page.
No, it has to work.
Yeah.
And it has to have its own internal logic. And especially think if you're going to, and its own structure. So if you're going to build a crazy house, it still has to stand. So that's it's not just anything. You could do anything, but if it doesn't work, if it's not interesting, then it doesn't, that's it.
Listen, just to jump ahead a little bit. You finished a beautiful book of poems. Beautiful. I keep going on. It seems like I'm just your publicist, but I don't say that lightly. And it's been may I mention who the poet is who really likes it?
Okay.
Yeah. It's still in manuscript, and you start sending it out to a publisher. And one of the persons who's read it with great avidity, intelligence, and care was the poet Billy Collins.
Yes.
And he loves the book, and now we're going to prepare to have that go into the world. So that's another project.
Yes, I'm just finishing some of the accompanying
and their drawings. Their drawings with it.
And also, one of the poems was recently taken by the New Yorker, so that'll be coming out soon, which I'm very excited about.
For loss. They're charming, witty, and unlike most poetry today, they actually rhyme. They
rhyme.
Rhyming patterns.
I would call them, like Graham Greene, I would call them entertainment.
Yeah, but beautiful. But why is it? Why is it? Let me just finish it. So now, this is the immediate project. But as a writer for the future, and you'll continue to write, and not just when you're dead, I know you like dead writers who continue to write. But if when we think about your work ahead, your projects ahead, your life ahead, what's two things? What books do you think of writing? And more generally speaking, what would you say your goal is as a writer? What's your ambition?
Well, I guess the first is to finish this book of poems, which I'm calling Stories in Verse. It's called Raoul Captured by Savages. And it has some accompanying drawings. And I think it's engaging in the way that poems used to be, that you could, read it to someone and it would entertain a room of non-poets, but just people would just enjoy it and be moved by it or surprised by it. So it sort of goes back in time in that way. And then after that, well, I'm working on another novel and also completing a book of essays, some of them humorous. My goal as a writer, well, that goes back to what I said before, which is to reach those particular readers that would receive my books in the same way that I received certain books, that made me feel that I understood a little more about the world, that I could appreciate its beauty, and I could hold on to it for a second. That moved me. I want to, yeah, I want to participate in that conversation.
Right. So let me just say, I think we should be closing soon. Is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
Oh,
Any advice perhaps to younger writers or any writers emerging, or anything you'd like to say? By the way, I interrupted. I didn't want to interrupt you, but when Edmund Wilson asked Scott Fitzgerald, what did he want? He said, I want to be the greatest writer that ever lived.
well,
I mean, it's very funny, but you see, there's a stretch, there's a
Yeah.
thought of your place in the world of literature, and you want to be in that place, and you want to be the best in that place. So
I think that's a great goal. I think he said that though when he'd been drinking, and he was also just out of college, and so it's a little easier to say something. When you're a little older, you're like, tone it down, don't say that out loud. But I think that's a beautiful goal. You should be aim for everything. Why should you think of yourself as less than any of the great, right? Not that you're there yet, or I'm there yet, but I think of these wonderful writers that I love. I think of them as peers, and that's the standard that I'm writing towards, whether or not I achieve that. But I think it's only good to be. You should aim the highest. You should ask the highest. So yes.
And Frederick, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This has been wonderful, but you are very interested in time, and our time is running short. I want to leave time for possibly there might be a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
And so let us stop there. I think the two of you have a special magic that comes across, and I enjoyed it immensely. Anyway, let's see if there are any questions. Jillian, were there any questions from the audience that we can close with?
Yes, we have two questions. The first one
Let's
is,
take two questions.
yeah, the first one. Which of your favorite writers would you want to have dinner with, dead or alive?
Let's see. First, my mind automatically goes to Marcel Proust. But then I'm not sure. Well, apparently he was a real, cut up. He was really goofy, and so that's why when he first began his project of serious writing, people didn't take him seriously because they're like, "What? The party guy, Marcel? The rich party boy." So he sort of. But he was really funny, and you also see it in the writing. People don't talk about that. So I think I feel a great affinity with Marcel Proust. So I would love to have dinner with him, perhaps. And also I think of Scott Fitzgerald, which is one of my early loves. When I was younger, I was writing, I would always imagine if I'd met him, and then I felt upset because I was like, maybe he wouldn't like me. Because if you've ever met a celebrity that you really love and then you meet them, it's often a nightmare and it's so disheartening. So never meet them unless it's me. But yeah, so I would love to have dinner with Fitzgerald, also because I'm sure he would drink a lot, probably stand on the table, start crying eventually, threaten to jump out the window as he did at the Princeton Club. And so I think he would be a lot of fun.
Okay, and I've always heard about writing what one knows. That's what should inform your work. But can you possibly reflect on how much your writing has helped you look at and inform your life?
Oh, that's very interesting. Yes, it has really. I mean, I could say this. I remember when I was writing but there have been certain stories or certain essays that when I was writing specifically like personal essays. And I had set out to write a story where about this this friendship that I had, which I thought I was set out to write this story about this amazing, beautiful, perfect friendship that just shined and there was nothing wrong with it. And then as I wrote it, I guess because that's what I wanted to believe, and it was that in part, but I guess I discovered that the relationship was much more fraught and complicated than I had thought. And so there's a certain honesty that comes through in the writing. And sometimes when I'm writing, it's very liberating in this way, because I guess as a nice person, there's the way that we behave when we're trying to get along in the world, and also the way that we want to see others and be generous with them and ourselves. And then there's pulled back and a second view of how you would see it if you were not one of the characters or people in the situation, but the author of it. And then suddenly you see a more complicated view. And so with that story, it's not that the story wasn't so different. It's just I realized that life is a lot more complex, and my feelings are a lot more complex than maybe I had originally thought. So, and that's come through a lot. It's enabled me to really be more honest with myself, because I think we often while we tell other people's stories about ourselves, we also tell stories to ourselves. And sometimes they're not exactly true. Sometimes we unconsciously edit or elide things to kind of conform to some idea that we have already. And so it opens another window. So it's taught me a lot about the world, and also about other people and myself with others.
That's very nice. Iris, I want to thank you for a lovely evening. And also Frederick, you were wonderful too. And for the audience, you will be seeing Frederick next month. He will be our speaker of the next month. And the two of you have a certain magic that you were referring to. And it's just wonderful to see you both. Thank you both. And thank you especially, Iris.
Oh,
Do you want to
thank
hold
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Now hit your palm. Hit it hard.
I'm supposed to appear or disappear now.
Yeah, vaporize. Now we have to be
Bye, everyone.
really smart. Goodbye. Thank you.